Alright, so let's start setting up our multi-camera projections in order to fix these gaps in our painting. So first of all, we're going to go to DMP base, and let's just click on DMP base matte to bring it into the material editor here. And here we're just going to File, Import Texture Streaming Map File, and go to our renders from Photoshop, and we want to get DMP base 01 frame 1. Okay, so that's our painting from frame 1, and let's just change the camera, world, and for camera projection we will select our ProjCam frame 1. And here we'll click to reset. Okay, and now let's bring this into here. And let's make some space. And let's create a blend, texture blend node. And let's plug them in this way with our frame 50 going on top because it's the higher quality painting, and frame 1 going on the bottom. Plug this into color, and as you can see we instantly have a result where our painting from frame 1 is now filling in all of these little gaps that were previously black. So from this to this, fantastic. So now we have that done. Let's go to our DMP distant, and here we want to do two things. First, we want to fill in the frame 1 projection, and second, we also want to import our moving sequence that we made in Nuke, where we animated our clouds to move across the image. So we will have that as the projection in Clarice now. So let's go to DMP distant, and again bring up this material, and let's import our texture. Okay, and here again, let's repeat the settings. Okay. Let's create a texture blend. And let's bring in our projection here. And now we have this projection, these two projections covering the whole image as well. But we want to animate or use our animated version of the second projection from frame 50. So here instead we're going to scroll down to our path, to the file name, and go to our renders, and I've rendered my Nuke animations into a separate folder from Clarice called Nuke. And let's have a look. I want to use my DMP distant anim from frame 50, and here if I just select this and I click detect sequence, it detects the full sequence of images and uses the appropriate one for every frame of our timeline. Just skip to the end. Okay, I see a change in the lighting. That seems like it works. Next up, let's create a new render layer, and we are going to bring in our overpaint that we did in Photoshop. So here, let's scroll down, and okay, yeah, here let's make a new folder. I'll just copy this one. Okay, and let's call this DMP overpaint. And let's call this DMP overpaint as well. And let's scroll down here and let's override the material with our material from DMP overpaint folder. So let's just call this DMP overpaint matte. and we'll change this. And since the DMP overpaint is only being projected from one frame, I'm just gonna delete the other nodes, and here select, oh no, whoops, select my render from Nuke. So my DMP overpaint anim from Nuke, where I combined my animations for the people and for the shanties and for the overpainting on the top and the boats into just one render, because I don't need them to be split out. I can do that in other ways. So let's just select that there, and let's detect the sequence, which it is. And here, let's make sure it's plugged into the color. And we have our overpainting here as a projection of just all of the little rooftops and the little people and the little boats that I painted. So we will be able to apply this separately in Nuke. But first of all, let's just copy this folder again, and we'll call this DMP overpaint alpha, and we'll duplicate this here and rename it to the same thing. And let's follow our path to the override material. And here we're just going to copy this, and we'll create DMP overpaint alpha matte. And for this alpha layer, we will select it. Okay, just so we have everything inside here. So for our alpha, the way we want to create this is by using a reorder node. And we're just going to plug this in here. And we're going to replace the R, the G, and the B channels with the alpha. So we are going to type in AAAA. So instead of RGBA, we have alpha in all 4 channels. And because I rendered my sequence out of Nuke with an alpha matching all of these little elements, we will get a black and white mask of everything we have here. And together, we will be able to render these out and bring them into Nuke and use the alpha to cut these out from the black background. So that will be very useful. Alright, so with these done, what we want to do next is start bringing in all of our elements, such as the waterfalls and the fog and the birds that we are going to place on cards. And I'm just going to go over the process once and show all of the tricks. And after that is just a repeat for all of the other layers, and I'll quickly go over them as well. So let's create a new group here, or a new context rather. And we're going to call this DMP waterfalls. And let's jump in. And here, let's just delete everything, and we'll go to File, Import Texture Streaming Map File, and go to our project, Renders, into Nuke. And here I have my waterfalls, and again frame 50 because these are all projected from frame 50. And so I'll grab my DMP waterfalls background 01. So these are the very back waterfalls. And what I'm going to do is here go to change the projection to camera and world. And here let's plug our camera in. And let's detect sequence. And here we're going to click on reset. And so let's duplicate our layer again here in the render layers, and we're going to call this DMP waterfalls BG01. And in our waterfalls here, actually, yeah, okay, let's just make this in the waterfalls. It's going to be quicker. Let's create a shading layer, and we're going to call this waterfalls shading layer. And let's create a filter. So for our material, let's select, oh whoops, I haven't made one yet. Let's select matte, Here we'll connect our projection to the mat, and we're going to call this DMP Waterfalls BG01 mat, and let's just use it here. And what we're going to do is, in our geometry, let's create a new context, and we're going to call this waterfalls. And in here, I'm going to make another new context and call this BG01. So let's copy this whole address, project scene geo waterfalls BG01, and put another / here in the filter, and star. So everything in the BG01 folder will have this BG01 waterfall projection applied to it. And here in our render layer, let's not forget to disconnect the override material and connect our shading layer. And here underneath, let's create another filter that selects everything else. And what we're going to do is, once we're rendering, we are just going to apply our black matte so that everything is black except for the waterfalls. But for now, let's do something slightly different, and let's go to our depth pass, which here I have it as ZMatte, and I will have everything else rendering as the depth pass while I place my cards for my waterfalls. What this does is it helps me see exactly where the objects are that I'm placing. And let's shut this down. Slightly make this bigger. And okay, let's go to our geometry folder for our waterfalls BG01, and let's create a new geometry polygrid. And let's find it here. I clicked F to focus on the object in this 3D viewport. And let's just zoom out a bit and make this bigger here in the center. Okay, so this is clearly now in a position where it should be seen in our view, but it's not. So what is the problem? Well, the problem is that we don't have this polygrid added to our geometry group. However, we don't want it in the main geometry group because that group is being used by all these other render layers. So we don't want to have all of these planes floating around in all of those render passes as well. So instead what we're going to do is, let's just follow the path to where this geometry all group is. And I'm going to do the same as I did previously, where I made bespoke groups for the airships and the volume. And I'm just going to call this GeoAll Waterfall BG01 group. Waterfalls actually. And here in the inclusion rule, oops, let's delete that for now. In the inclusion rule, let's add, where is it? Yep, our path from here. Okay. And let's go here into our render layer for the waterfalls and select. Yep. So now let's go find our little polygrid here. And what we're going to do is we're going to move this into position where these waterfalls are. Roughly, it doesn't have to be perfect because there isn't going to be enough parallax to make it look too fake, but we can still try to do our best to place it in the correct position. Okay, so I remember one being here, I believe. A little bit further. Okay. Okay, awesome. And the advantage of using the depth here is that we can see exactly where the scar is in 3D space, but still we're able to see our waterfall very clearly. And so it's a nice way to work because you get instant feedback on whatever you're doing. So let's just Control C, Control V this grid to make a copy of it. And let's move this all the way over here where my next waterfall is. And I'm just doing this from memory. Feel free to double check with your image when placing these elements. It can be very easy to forget exactly where you've put them in 3D space, and also when you're painting you can ignore 3D space a little bit, so you can sometimes place things in a way that's not too realistic, where you don't realize that certain bits of geometry are separate, but I think we can get away with quite a lot. But you know, if it helps you to kind of refine everything, do check with your finished concept to see exactly where you've put these for comparison. Okay, so this one I think I want to be kind of right behind here somewhere. Okay. But I don't want it to encompass this other waterfall, so let's make this thinner. Okay. And otherwise we could try to project this straight onto the geometry, and maybe for some of these background ones it would work. But I'm kind of afraid that for the ones that are sort of here in the middle of all this geometry, it might not look good enough. So I'm just going to place them all by hand. Here. Oh, whoops. I accidentally selected the background. And we can zoom in a little bit to help us. I think I want this to be in front of this structure. So I've actually placed it incorrectly in my matte painting. But I think we will be fine. There should be no more than maybe a pixel of parallax there, so I think it won't be very noticeable. Let's make another copy. Okay, so actually let's disable this one and have another look at this. I don't want to overlap these two. Okay. And now I have one here, but I want this to be even closer, somewhere around here. Okay, cool. And let's copy again. Oh, oops. And this one should be more towards the back. Okay, I think right in front of all of these. Okay, cool. So now we have all of these background waterfalls placed. And all we're going to do is we'll go to our shading layer for the waterfalls. And we're going to change this filter for everything else to our black matte. And so now we have all of these animated waterfalls placed on cards in 3D. And what we're going to do is we're going to render again the full sequence for just these waterfalls, and they will track correctly in 3D space, and they will also be animated. So this might take a few trial runs to get the animation speed right and the positioning right, but it's a very quick method of doing something like this, especially as we already have the base for it made in our concept. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to copy this for my every other waterfall layer, and repeat the same process. So feel free to do the same for whatever similar kind of objects you have that could use this technique in your matte painting as well. Alright, so now I've set up all of my other waterfalls, and let's just have a look. So this is my original DMP waterfalls background, and in the same DMP waterfalls folder within the shaders, I have created all of my additional ones, so for background, foreground, midground, as well as the shading layer. And in the shading layer, I followed the pattern that I set down at the start, and I simply created rules for each folder of the waterfall geometry, all of which I made in the same folder here. So all of these filters select the objects within those contexts and apply the respective materials to them. So if we quickly just go through these, so we have our background, we have our midground, we have another midground set, and all set up the exact same way. And then we have our foreground waterfalls as well. However, the one thing I did differently with the foreground waterfalls is that even though they were from my concept, which was painted all from frame 50 of this sequence, I projected them all from frame 1, because here was the problem I was having. Let me zoom into one of these. Okay. If I just go to this folder. Oops, let's select the correct one. So here I have my waterfall, and the reason I've projected it from frame 1 instead of frame 50 is because it touches the edge. As you can see, if I, here in my texture node, if I just select this, and I change the projection camera to be projection camera from frame 50. Oh, whoops, did it for the wrong one. Here, if I change this to frame 50, as we can see, because this is projecting from here, while it works fine here at the end of the sequence, at the start it is not yet in view, and therefore we get this black cutoff. So, just to compromise and make this as quick as possible, I projected these from frame 1, and they'll work just as fine because the perspective is pretty much the same. And so we have these, all of these different layers, and I've spaced the cards out slightly, so let's just have a look at those, the cards that I'm projecting these on. Okay, let's just, I wonder if I can select all of these and unhide. No, okay. Okay, let's just unhide all of these and select my foreground ones. Here you can see that I've spaced them all out at different distances from the camera, so that in between all of these different layers we get a little bit of parallax between each of them, and it takes a couple of tries to get it to look right, but it's worth the effort. So let's just hide all of these again, and let's look at our next thing, which is the rolling mist, which I did the exact same way. And if we go into the shader folder, I have this as DMP fog, and here I've thrown in a few of these fog layers together and created a shading layer. So in the shading layer, I've got my rolling mist applied to this rolling fog, and then I also have a VDB fog, which we'll go over soon, and I have my haze layer with its own corresponding material, and I've also included my airships as a black matte, and here in the geometries group, in addition to including these cards that contain or that have the projections of the fog on them, I've also included the airships, so if they fly through any of this fog, it will correspond in 3D space. So for the rolling fog, I've just projected on these cards, and I'm trusting that there's not going to be enough parallax to tell the difference, but I still place the cards in realistic spots around the geometry, so we can see this tower jutting out in front of my fog layer behind it. But more Interestingly, if we go to my haze layer, let's have a look at this. I have my haze projected again onto a card, or a plane as they are called in Clarice. However, I've just put it because my layer in Photoshop was just skewed to kind of roughly match the perspective. I've put a huge plane going through my entire city, and so this will roughly be in the correct place in 3D when projected. However, what I don't want is all of these sharp edges. It looks like this is a water level or something. So what I'm going to do instead for this haze is here in the render layer for geometries, I'm just going to simply select my geo for the haze itself. And so we will create this render separately and then multiply it with the depth pass in Nuke in order to get a little bit of this effect, but not much, and have it interacting with the environment around it. Okay, so next up, let's have a look at my layer for birds, where I've projected again my animated sequence for the birds onto cards again. And the cards, if I can find them, are again just positioned roughly in the city where these birds are. And I'm not trying to be too careful. Again, there's not that much parallax. The birds are moving, but I want them to be in roughly the correct spot. And here you can see I've kind of positioned these cards in such a way where some of them can be in front of others, etc. And just made that work. Alright, so that concludes this part of the tutorial about placing bespoke projections onto cards in 3D space. Before we look at rendering, let's have a look at adding some additional layers, render layers, to our setup, and we're going to do our airships first. So we will animate them, we will have to redo the projections as my positions of the spaceships changed, and I'll quickly go over that just as a repeat of the earlier bit of the tutorial. And in addition, we are going to project our jets onto cards that are parented to the spaceships and have them move with the spaceships in real time and render them out separately and comp them on top in Nuke. Okay, so let's proceed.